My journey to the first major prison started on a cold January day. I was wearing a thin jumpsuit and blue slip-on shoes. I had handcuffs and shackles and the magic box and chain that tied it all together. And we were shuffling single file up to the bus. And even though it was 20-some degrees, we didn't have jackets. Because the receiving center sent people to prisons all over the state, but they never got the stuff back. So when it came time to issue a jacket, they said, hey, sorry, we're out. You'll just have to make do. So we're all shivering, and we get on the bus, and we ask them to turn the heat on, and they really don't, but eventually they do. We have to stop over and switch buses, and then we're on our way to the place. And the conversation on that bus was the same as it had been in jail and in receiving. It was these two messages that didn't make any sense. Prison is violent and crazy, and you gotta watch out for booty bandits, and it's terrible. And also, oh my God, you're gonna love it. It's so much better there. You'll be able to do all these things. And I didn't understand what they were talking about. So we pull up to the prison, and we pull inside this giant sally port, and we get off, and we get to take the handcuffs and everything off. We walk into property. And I had tried to stash a bunch of tobacco in different places because people had told me if you're going from receiving to a level 4, you can't have an open can of tobacco. And I didn't have a sealed one, so I stashed it underneath the stuff and in my box. And the property officer's pulling stuff out. He's like, bro, why didn't you just bring tobacco? What are you doing? I told him what they had said, and he was like, man, hold on. He went in the back and he actually got half a pack of cigarettes and brought it out and just stuck it down for me. I was like, that's amazing. And then the guy who ended up being my cell partner, who was on that same bus, he didn't have headphones. And the rule was if you had a tape player, you had TV, you had to have headphones. You weren't allowed to listen to it out loud. So the officer gave him a hard time and said, man, I can't give you your TV until you have them. He was reasonable with the officer. The officer went in the back, got headphones, put his name on them, and then gave him those. And those property officers were some of the best people I saw over 19 years in prison. We put all of our stuff into these net commissary bags and then put those bags in a cart, and we started pushing it down the boulevard. And it's this long concrete stretch, and you have fences and razor wire, and it just looks crazy and bombed out. And the officer had to escort each of us to a pod. So we went into the first one, and it was totally locked down. Nobody was out of their cells. All the doors were shut. They had these little grates over the tray slots, but even those had plastic covers on them, so you couldn't really yell out of them. I was like, what did I get myself into? And then they opened a door. They basically threw the guy and his stuff in there and then shut the door from the booth. But then we go into our pod, and all of a sudden there are people out. They're using the phone and taking a shower and playing cards and doing pull-ups and push-ups, and it just looked like a normal life. It almost looked like a college dormitory. So I walked in, and the guy from the bus was going to be my roommate, and I was like, okay, at least I've talked to this guy. I know he's not completely crazy. He ended up having some drama, but he wasn't a bad guy. So we went in there, and he actually knew a bunch of guys in the pod because they had grown up together from the same neighborhood, the same politics. So all of a sudden I'm introduced to people, and I feel like, okay, this isn't so bad. And I had to figure out how the shower line works because everybody knows everybody's name and everybody has a line and how they do it. But once I did, I was like, this isn't bad. There's nothing to be afraid of here. Why are people so freaked out? My cell partner ended up getting called back to court because he'd gotten a whole bunch of new indictments since he'd been locked up. So I was in the cell by myself. And the way they did breakfast was they would call breakfast call. You'd have to wave your hand out the tray slot. They would open your door. You would walk out, and then they would shut the door behind you. Then you'd wait in the pod, sometimes for 5 minutes or sometimes 20 minutes or sometimes an hour. Then they would open the front door, and everybody would go to chow, and then everybody would come back together when they were done. So normally guys were out there, and it was just kind of quiet, and we're all depressed, and it's 5 a.m, and we don't know what's going on. But it was an especially kind of quiet, tense morning. It was the first time I really began to realize that silence and quiet in prison can be a really bad thing. So I heard it, and then all of a sudden these two guys started arguing. They were only a few feet from me. One guy raises his voice, the other one raises his voice. This guy reaches in his pocket, and he pulls out this lock and a sock, and the other one reaches in his pocket and pulls out a giant Rambo knife. I was like, bro, I'm about to watch somebody get murdered. Where am I? What is going on? They start going back and forth, and the guy with the giant Rambo knife reached over and grabbed one of those trash can lids. The ones with big round thing and the flap. So he's basically holding a shield and a sword, and the other guy has a lock and a sock. But instead of locking on the sock like you're supposed to, he actually had 2 locks down at the bottom of the sock. He swings at one time. The guy lifts the trash can lid. The locks go flying out of the sock, so he's holding an empty sock against a guy with a shield and a sword. And I was like, bro, he's about to die. And he sits there for a second and tries to bob and weave, and I don't know what he was thinking. Then all of a sudden they call chow. And the officers hadn't even noticed any of this. Even though the pod is dead quiet except for the squeaking of shoes, even though you could feel it in the air, the officers just didn't care. It was 5 a.m. They were getting ready to get off shift. They weren't paying attention. So we all ran to chow. I was like, bro, I don't want to be around for the bloodshed. By the time I got back, it was okay. Things had calmed down. I don't understand how that happened. I know that nobody died. There may have been some bloodshed, but it wasn't deadly. And that was the reality that I found. That prison was one of those places where I would walk in and things would be perfectly normal, and you just get a shower and get on the phone and read your book and play cards, and the next minute something like that would happen. You never really knew what it was going to be. And like sometimes you could stay ahead of the politics or stay ahead of the drama and know something was going to go bad. But for the most part, at any moment, something bad could happen. And it was still 99% calm and 1% crazy. But the problem is when you don't know how to prepare for that, when you're always waiting for that 1% or for that other shoe to drop, it's just a difficult thing to adjust to. So even out here in the world, sometimes when I feel really calm and things feel really peaceful, there's a part of me that's like, man, this ain't right. Like, what's going on? Like, when is the other thing going to happen?